Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Moderately Successful Podcast, where we understand not everyone necessarily wants to live the life of 1%er, meaning they don't necessarily want that work-life balance, and success is scalable, whether you want to make 6 figures a year or 7, and all the things that go with that work-life balance. So we're here to dial in and look at the other 99% to see how they're living life on their terms. And today we got another special guest, Jonathon Brindifer.
Hello.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome in.
Jonathon Brindifer, if you guys don't know who he is, which you will after this episode, obviously, but he owns Develop Mathematical Thinking Institute. He is a former university professor, and he wants to become the next pro pickleball player, I'm pretty sure. So
Pickleballer, Spartan racer. Invested in a coach, the whole gamut.
Absolutely.
Everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Jonathon, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for
Thank you,
being
guys.
on, man.
Appreciate you.
Thank
I know you got long days, but
No, this is great.
yeah. So like first question that we like to kick off is like, in the words of you, what do you do? Like introduce yourself to everybody for the listeners and the viewers.
Yeah, I could talk for a long time just on that one question.
Well, tell us about DMTI. I think that's
That's a great starting point.
Yeah, so DMTI, Developing Mathematical Thinking Institute. So we work with school districts and work with teachers, elementary, middle, and high school. And we really help the teachers understand mathematics, how to conceptually understand it, procedurally understand it, how to teach it, and how to help kids connect it to the world around them as well. So, on a daily basis, my team, we spend most of our days out in schools with kids and with teachers. So our philosophy is every one of my staff members, you can walk into a kindergarten classroom or to a 9th grade classroom, any topic, anything in mathematics, they have to be able to go, yes, here's what we're doing. Here's how you teach fractions in 3rd grade, place value in 2nd grade, and here's where kids get stuck, and here's what you should do about it.
And how did you develop that curriculum or standard, and how do you measure that?
Yeah, great question. So that takes me back quite far, though, as a professor. So actually, before that, I taught algebra in Tacoma, Washington. I was a computer science major and a math major, and just absolutely loved it. And when I was working with kids, mostly 9th graders, and I saw that they just struggled with mathematics. They weren't fluent. They didn't understand place value, ratio proportion. And so then trying to get them to understand algebra, I was like, wow, this is really difficult. And so as I was teaching, I got recommended to work on a PhD. So I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and my eyes were just like wide open. I was like, holy cow, there's a whole other world about understanding mathematics. Mm-hmm. And I focused on cognitive psychology and math. So how does the mind work? And how do kids really think about mathematics or not think about it? And how can we get them to? And how do we get teachers to understand that? So it's a long story, but working with from teaching to then getting a PhD at the University of Wisconsin, where I worked with colleagues in the Netherlands, learned about what's happening in Asian countries, Europe, and then started working in Chicago's public schools, Milwaukee public schools, went from teaching 9th grade, taught kinder and 1st grade to see, hey, okay, what happens with 5- and 6-year-olds? Became a professor, taught psychology, research, and math at the university. But my passion was going out and working with the teachers and kids. So I'd do research, I'd read about it, think about it, talk to colleagues, go out, work with the kids, the teachers, write a grant, and then just kind of this cycle continued to work. And as I was doing that, school districts started calling me up, and we started consulting with them. Mm-hmm. And my team that I started building started going out doing more. And finally, I had to make a choice of, do I stay at the university or do I go to DMTI? So 3 years ago, I made that choice.
When did you see the problem, or like that you wanted to solve this education template, I guess, so to speak?
Yeah, so I think, I probably didn't answer your question completely, but so I think in 1990, 91, and 92, the National Councils of Teachers Mathematics, NCTM, came up with the first standards. So kind of goes back, what are the standards for each grade level bands? What should they be learning? And I was like, wow, kids they don't know this. Mm-hmm. They're not learning. They don't like mathematics. They're struggling. And so that got me on the path of, okay, what do I do to get them to understand mathematics? And it came down to really thinking mathematically, which means not what a lot of people think about in math. They like, oh, I'm really good with computation. I know algorithms. I'm really good with worksheets. And I'm like, that's not math. So being able to understand math, see patterns, and being able to apply them to all the problems around us. And so how do we get kids to do that? Then I found out, oh, teachers were also part of the system that really didn't get that same understanding of mathematics. So it's like, okay, that's the problem.
So really, it was just an education problem as far as educating teachers so they can educate kids properly.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Did you see an opportunity for a monetary gain through this as well?
I don't think originally. So when I became a professor, I actually thought I was going to go back into the classroom and teach. And then I became a professor and I started doing the research. So I was like, well, okay, if kids aren't understanding this by 9th grade, because Algebra 1 is the most important topic to get kids through to be able to be successful in everything else. So it's like, okay, what are the problems? Okay, they're not fluent in addition, subtraction strategies, multiplication, division, fractions, place value. I'm like, oh, okay, there's some really big issues. Where do they start? Oh, this one actually starts in kinder. This one starts in 3rd grade. And so I started studying that, reading tons of articles, talking to colleagues, writing grants, getting research dollars, going out, working in usually Title I schools. Title I schools are ones where the more disadvantaged, African American, Hispanic, poor kids, Native American. So I started working with those groups and going, oh, if I do this, if I teach them this thing with mathematics, how do they actually understand it? Okay, now that they understand it, now how do I give that information to the teacher? So those grants helped me really kind of build the understanding. And then,
Can you explain grants?
Oh,
like
yeah.
How integral that is and what the purpose is for those?
Yeah, boy, I better take a drink on this one.
We're looking for a sponsor, not Krieg.
Yeah. So grants are really interesting. So being a professor, there's kind of 3 main things you have to do. You have to teach. So that's a big part. You have to do research. You have to write books, articles, really research journal articles are the main thing. And then you have to do service, which is being on committees at the local level to a national level. So really interesting. Most professors either don't like writing grants or they don't have an avenue to get there. So math, science, engineering, we want to fund those. So what I do is I'll read probably about 300 articles on a topic. I try to summarize it and then talk about what is the actual problem. So the problem is, one of them is that one of my first grants when I was at Boise State was really looking at teachers' knowledge of math and of teaching math. And so it's like, okay, so the research is for elementary, for K-6, that most teachers aren't there for math, they are there for language arts. So how do we get them to understand math? And then how do they actually teach math in a way that was different than how they actually learned mathematics, which is typically like worksheets. So then you have to look at who's going to fund it. So there's the National Science Foundation, NSF, the IES, the Institute for Educational Sciences. The Department of Ed sometimes has different grants. And then there's also local, like in our area, we have like the Albertsons Foundations, Micrown Foundation. And so I wrote to each of those. I'd submit a proposal and say, here's what I'd like to do. Here's the problem I want to solve. I'm going to do, here's the deeper understanding of what's going on. Here's why I think this method will work. And then they're going to say, yep, we're going to give you X number of dollars to fund that, which could be anywhere from probably some of my smaller ones were maybe 100, 150,000 to some grants were about $2.5 million for about a 3-year period. Okay. So then we would go out to schools and we would work with the teachers and the kids and study it and come up and make sure that, yep, student achievement's increasing. And then so these kind of that process with the grant.
Okay.
I'm super curious, like with those teachers too, were a lot of them open up to it, or were there some? I think that's like a big thing because it's like since we're trainers, majority of us are open to wanting to educate ourselves in another way of methodology. But if there's teachers that are like, "No, screw it, I don't want to learn from this guy. Who's this guy?" Like, how did you pitch all of this?
That's a wonderful
And why
question.
did you have the cred?
Yeah.
Oh, great questions.
And how has it evolved? I'll add that in there.
I like it.
1, 2, 3.
Yep.
Oh.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, they all do not want to.
Oh.
Most people do not want to change.
Sure.
Absolutely not. So you have that third, maybe 20% that just really gung ho. Yep, I want to do this. A good third, 20% resistant. Absolutely not. Not going to change. Don't have the time. Don't want to. Whatever reason. And then everybody in the middle. So the cred, I think that's probably the good question. If I was going to write a book about my time as being a professor, it'd be called The Blue Collar Boy in the Ivory Tower. So I grew up, 2 parents, went to tech school, super hardworking. Dad went to the Marines. I just watched them just work and do everything themselves. And I'm like, okay, that's my life. I'm just going to work at this. I want these kids and these teachers to be successful. I don't want to be a person that comes in and just lectures to them, because I know that that's going to be like, whatever. So I can tell you, this is how you're going to teach the topic of tangent.
Right. Do you think your passion separated you?
So I think that's probably part of it too. I have a number of colleagues who have said, yeah, a lot of it's your passion, but I also think it's all the hard work. I read a ton, and then I go in and I work with the teachers and the kids. And then, so when they ask me something, my initial response is like, oh, when I'm working with second graders or second grade teachers, this is what we're seeing, da, 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 da. And so, and that's what I was kind of referring to back with my staff. All my staff is so wonderful, where over time we've built that. And a lot of them at first are like, well, I was a 6th grade teacher. I'm like, yep, you got to be willing to be at the kinder first and 8th grade level. And we're in with kids first. And so now that's where I think the credibility is, because when we say something, we're like, do you remember this? No, this is what kids are doing. They're like, oh yeah. And then we do this actually happens. And so they immediately take those ideas and they see that actually works. And so over time, I think I've built up a really good reputation here in Idaho, which then has now extended around where, this actually does make sense. And yeah, so I guess over time, for me, it's just picking out problems. I remember like place value. It seems really odd. Like, how do kids, the 4 worst topics by 8th grade across the nation are understanding fractions, place value, ratio proportion, and fluency. And it's like, okay. So I don't know if you want to hear any ideas with that.
Go for it. Give us the example.
It's probably going to go over my head, but
no,
please.
it's not.
It's going to give me
See,
PTSD.
So I think that's what,
I know how to pick things up and put them down.
Heavy things too.
Yes, that's so true. But I think that's where we come in. It's like, we don't make fun of like, oh my gosh, you don't understand this with mathematics. You don't understand. We don't do any of that with teachers. We're always about like, oh no, and I think it goes back to, I'm curious all the time. Yeah. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Let's look at this. This actually works. So here's a real simple one. So we'll start with end of kindergarten, 1st grade.
Perfect.
So they're counting. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, and then they're up to 8. And so by the end so we're up around April, and they're like, oh, now it's 10. So you're like, is that a big deal? Mm-hmm. So now you have these 2 digits. You have a 1 and a 0, 11, 1, 1, 12. And the teacher's like, okay, so this 12 is 10 and 2. And the kids are like, you watch them, they're nodding their head. I'm like, they don't know this. They're thinking of, there's 12 things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. But we're trying to get them to go, no, there's 10 here and then 2 more. Because we want them to be able to count on from 10. Seems like such a simple idea. And the kids are like, no, I don't get it. Every time. And so they don't get that idea of place value, that you have this 10, which will be the same like 1, 1, 1, 111 is a unit of 100, a 10, and a 1. It's like, okay. So after working for a couple of years with the kids, I took painter's tape and I put them around 10. So if they had a 12, I put around 10 of them. I said, oh, there used to be 10 ones in here. Now it's its own unit of 10. And all of a sudden, kids are like, oh, yes. So then they go, oh, a 10, 2 10s, 3 10s, 4 10s, 10, 20, 30. Simple idea. But all of a sudden, just that painter's tape around there, they're like, you could just see the kids get it. That no longer is this just 12 ones, because they're like, there's just 12 things there. Now it's its own unit of 10 and 2. And so that was game changer right there for place value, which
Yeah.
leads into extended time.
So it's more of like an engagement thing at that point, because
Mhm.
it's like engaging their brain rather than just, do you get it?
Right.
Yep.
Like, do you not?
Learning how they think.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's actually, we have 5 for our framework for developing mathematical thinking. That's actually our number one attribute is you have to start with kids thinking first and where they are, and then building on that versus just always telling them what to do.
Did you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Because I remember you said like going into the research of like psychology. So like what research did you do? Was that during like your master's degree, like post or like into your doctorate, or how did that go?
Yeah. So during my doctorate, I mostly focused on cognitive psychology. So there's kind of 3 areas of psychology to focus on. And so cognition is really about the mind, how it works. And part of it, if you think of like strawberries, the underneath strawberries, the root system, they're rhizomes. So they interconnect to each other. And so you want your brain to actually, every idea that you have should interconnect with multiple ideas. So the more that happens, the greater knowledge you have, the ability to remember things long term and to solve problems over time happens. So that's cognition. That's how thinking of our mind versus like behaviorism, which is really important too, because we do that like with sports too. We need to practice something over and over again. But a lot of times in school, that's all we do is we practice these procedures, this recipe, this algorithm. But what happens if you think of it like a chain link, and if one of those links is missing, so you're going down the link of thinking, and then it's gone, you forget. And what do? You panic. And then the chances of you solving a problem, you're done. So the more just single links that you have, the chain link type of knowledge, that actually creates a weakness in your memory. But if you have, instead of having just those links, they interconnect the rhizome idea, you actually have more knowledge of any given topic. That's for anything, history, English, whatever. And then the third one is social learning theory, where you just imitate others. You have communication, you have conversations. So it's really the blending of those 3 together. And a lot of the research over time from Vygotsky from early 1900s said it's really about cognition first, social conversations, and then you practice, and then your practice becomes varied, which sometimes in math, for sure, we actually don't vary practice. You probably remember it's all the same type of worksheet. I'm like, oh.
How much does their willingness to learn and their enthusiasm to learn play a role in like their ability to actually learn and apply things?
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to your question too. Yeah, it really there's a huge amount of it for the teachers and for the kids is how to engage them and get them excited. What I love though is when you focus on the concept, understanding something, and so when you get kids to understand it, they're like, oh, I get that, which is, I think, same like when you're working out. It's like, oh, that's why I need to do this exercise. To do this Spartan race, I have to practice this. Yes. So same type of idea that engages more of the kids. Obviously not going to get all the kids because for things, but like even, there's a 6th grade. So we ended up building a lot of, after the research, because of all the curriculum that's out there and that's not super helpful for kids, we end up building a K-8 curriculum over the last few years, which has been pretty awesome, but pretty chaotic.
And who's we?
So mostly me.
Right. So you're the leader of the charge.
Yep,
And like more
and-
delegating.
Yep. And then Sam, one of the guys, does a lot. And then my other staff does reviews a lot of it and adds things to it. So yeah. And part of what I'm looking at is how do you engage the kids? So like, for example, we're going to talk about racial proportion. Well, what the heck does that mean? Where you have something, you're going to proportionally build something bigger and bigger. So I built a unit for 6th grade where it's all about the Great Wall of China. It's like, okay. So you start the unit where you start engaging kids like, well, how long do you think the Great Wall of China is? Or was it ever? And people are like, a lot of kids don't know exactly, but anything from like 200 yards, 5 miles, 10,000. Teachers are like, I don't know, 5,000 miles. It's like, well, it was actually 13,000 miles in its entirety. It took 1,000 years for the Ming Dynasty to build this, and over 5,000 of it's still up right now. It's like, okay, well, what if we took a brick, like one brick, okay, and then you have to get, and it's 6 inches high, and you're going to go 10 feet up. How many bricks would that be? So just getting the idea of like, oh, well, the one brick's 6, 2 of them would be a foot. Oh, can I go? Oh, 20 of them would be, so just 20 bricks there. But now every watchtower is 3/4 of a mile. How do we figure out proportionally build these 20 bricks, 5 feet, 10 feet, and we're going to go 3/4 of a mile? Well, how far is that? 5,210 feet. So now that is a mile. So that's about, 3,500. Okay. So just that idea of proportion. So the entire 4 weeks, they're learning about the Great Wall of China and little things like, well, why is the watchtower 3/4 of a mile? Just things like that. And people because usually the math problems are like, 2 trains traveling, 2 different distances or at each other or away from each other, when it's like, oh, we don't care. And it's like, well, if somebody comes to attack you, they're attacking you, and you put fire up, you at the watchtower over there, you can see it at 3. That's the farthest you can see is 3/4 of a mile. You can see fire. So now all of a sudden it's like, and every 3/4. So all these watchtowers, and all of a sudden all your armies come down. So just silly things like that start engaging kids more than just going, oh, I'm working on this one problem or this algorithm, and I have to do it 20 times. Not fun.
I'm curious, what's like the success rate of like the kids learning? Because I'm sure there are like a couple outliers outside of that.
Like pre you coming in and post you coming in.
Yeah. So that's kind of the cool thing is every time we work with schools, student achievement increases. And I think that's where like leaving the university and just building DMTI, was like, because that's what we do. We end up increasing. So like one of my favorite stories is we're in Selma, Alabama. So Dallas, it's kind of funny, Dallas County School District. I think Dallas, Texas, but no, it's Selma, Alabama. And we started working with them about 5 years ago with one school. They saw us at a conference. They said, please come in. And they had a 53, I think it was a 52 or 53 F rating at their school. That's how they do it there. And in 1 year, we took them to a C- rating and then a C+ rating of a 76% within 2 years. So again, great question. It's like teachers that are motivated and they're doing the things that we talk about, their achievement can increase every single time we get their classroom. But for a school to increase, we're so excited about that because we know there's going to be 20 teachers going, close my door, I'm not going to do it. They're resistant to it. So if we can get a school to increase from 52% to 76 within 2 years, and that's typically what we do, is we'll go in and over a 2 to 3 year period, we give teachers the knowledge of mathematics, how kids learn, and here's things that you're doing that are not working, here's things to do, and student achievement always increases. But we're probably like you were saying too, there's always a level that's resistant. And education's hard too because they don't it's not like a job where you can fire people. That's just not happening. Like the principal's not, you're doing this well, great, we're going to keep you. You're not doing it well, you're gone. Nope, the teachers are there and they know that that you can't just get rid of them. So that creates another element of how do you create change within the system. So you do have to motivate them.
Can we talk about your experience at the university level and then like the culmination to your separation from the university and what that process was like? Was it a difficult decision?
Yeah. Another whiskey on that one. So what was the first part just about the university?
Yeah. So what was your experience at the university level? Yeah. And then what was the process to get to the point where you're going to separate yourself and kind of do your own thing?
Great question. Okay. So working at the university. So I absolutely loved being a professor. Teaching the courses. Not everybody there loves doing the research. And I think that was a difference where like in our department, probably so out of about 60 professors, about 3 or 4 got all the big grants. So there's not a lot of people doing, and when you get the grant, I should separate this. You get the grant, which is part of the research. You actually get credit for that. But then
what allows those people to have that pull? Those 3 or 4 people?
That's a great question because a lot of people who didn't.
Is it political?
No, it's literally hard work.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to read a lot. You have to have good ideas about how you can actually create change based on what the research has shown. So I always think of research as like an iceberg, where you have all this stuff that's done before, that's older, called seminal pieces. And then over time, like the top part of the iceberg that you can see is just the last 5-6 years, like what's cutting edge. But you have to really understand what's happened before and what's the face that you're looking at that's like the normal type of research. But there's also stuff in the back that people are doing that are kind of fringe type of stuff. So for myself, like regular education with mathematics is what I'm looking at. But like, what about special ed? That's not always the iceberg that I'm looking at, like kids who really struggle in mathematics. So I have to understand that entire research base and then propose that study to get the funding when they're like, oh, we're going to give this money. And then you do it and you actually show success. And then you write the next grant. And so then it just cycles now. But to write that initial grant, that's probably about 250 hours of my time by myself, in my basement, basically doing that work. And a lot of people are like, oh, I want to get a grant. And I'm like, then you have to do that work.
So you're literally putting in hours to research and prove your point as to why this is needed.
Yep. And you get no
so it's totally worthwhile.
Yep. But you get no credit for all those days, all those hours. You get nothing for that. It's all of your time. And so then,
and that's the university's money, right? Essentially, it's not your, or is it your money?
Oh, so
like that's not yours to take home at all. It's strictly to invest in that thing.
That's a great question too. Okay, so doing the initial work, it's all on your time. So like it's my summertime, it's my during fall and spring, whenever I can find time. Whenever I find time to do that work, and then you get that first grant. Oh my gosh! Okay, now so let's say I bring in $1 million for 3 years. So depending on who's the funding agency, the universities they take 40% of that money away. So $400,000 is gone.
Just off the top?
Off the top.
Okay.
So I know I get $600,000 to work with. So I can hire staff, I can give stipends to teachers, I can travel to conferences. So I have to budget all that work. So it was great for me to like learn about all those things. So then I was able to get those grants, do that work, but then and then usually you have to teach 3 classes in the fall, 3 classes in the spring. You buy yourself out of one class, so it gives you an extra, 8 to 10 hours a week to be going out to the schools, in my case, collecting the work, doing all the statistics. That's a whole other issue is your understanding of stats to write the articles. You have to be a good writer. You have to understand qualitative and quantitative research, understand the stats, write it up, and get it published. So then you start publishing these articles. You get more articles. That's that one piece of being a professor. You get 2 to 3% jump every year if you're doing well. So you get a little increase, but it's not that much.
Salary increase.
And that stats stuff is excuse my French, but a fucking pain in the ass. That was like the last thing I wanted to do in my master's program.
Most people hate it.
And did you get like separate mentorship or help through that, or did you self-teach yourself?
Yeah. For me, it was I relied on when I was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Those I did 4 years, and I did a postdoc there. And I took every class. I talked to every professor. Anytime there was a question, I'm like, "Hey, how are you doing that? How are you doing the stats?" I just put myself in. I'm like, "I want to learn about that. Tell me how you do that."
Just the ultimate self-starter.
Yeah.
And so with those studies, were you doing more like observational or like kind of like randomized control trials?
Great. So again, I had great mentorship at University of Wisconsin. I love my professors there. They taught me so well. And for me, I think this is the best way. You first start with an observation. You're like, I have a hunch. I see it. I start observing it. I collect it. I write about that. So that's qualitative. I'm qualitatively looking for patterns.
Right.
I see the pattern. I write about that. And then for the grant cycles, like in IES and NSF, the biggest funding agencies for education, is you start that way. You get a little tiny money. And then you go, oh, well, let me do it with a case study with one school. Oh, that worked? Now let me do it like 3 schools that are different. Okay. And then you build up to a controlled study, which is the ultimate. And that's why I was saying, like, you start with like that 100,000 and then you and then you end with a 2.2 million. But for me, I love that. So going from that study to that study, going, found it. Okay. Now let me start over on this topic. And so that's what I did for my 20 years.
Is there a rush in like seeing the initial problem and then seeing it through?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I actually love those first 2, the observational, seeing it. I'm like, I got this. But then it's so much work to actually show it in, now you got to show it in 5 different, like West Coast, East Coast, urban, suburban, so now you have to get in LA, you have to go to Dallas. So then now you're working with colleagues, and that creates a whole nother set of problems.
What do you attribute that desire to? Because I think a lot of us have ideas of things, and like we like, oh yeah, I could figure that out, and then we don't always follow through with it. What's your desire to like see the thing and then like really push through resistance and like go until you complete the process and validate it?
Oh man, yeah, Austin, that's a great. I think it's like with working out too. My dad was a Marine too, and so I think it was just we're going to go camping, and like there was or hunting or whatever we're doing. It's like there's that process. You're going to get there, and all the pain, whatever, doesn't matter. So I still like the workouts where, like when we're doing stuff, he's like, okay, 20 more squats, or this is everybody hates this one. I'm like, I love it. It's great. I don't know. I think goes back to my title of my book, The Blue Collar Boy in the Ivory Tower. I think I love to do that stuff, and I know I'm just be honest. Like a lot of my colleagues, they didn't. They just like no. And the other thing with the grants coming back, the financial part is you can pay for yourself for the summer.
Yeah.
So most professors have the summer off, and so you can choose not you just teach, and then you have those 2 or 3 months off. But if I'm doing research, that's what I'm doing. I can pay myself a summer salary, so you do get a bump in a sense. And then, but then I use that time to write, to read, to get more articles out, and it just kind of cycles through.
Do you think you have an innate ability to recognize things, or is it truly just grit and like being persistent?
That's a great question. I want to.
So clearly, you're very intelligent and passionate. So that's not in question. But like, did the passion come first, or did you think you figured out you were good at something and then you pursued it?
Oh, that's a great question. For me, I like doing the hard work. I like solving problems. I think I grew up with my family, my mom. We played games all the time, and I had 2 older siblings, one younger, but I always wanted to beat my older siblings. So we're playing Monopoly or whatever game we're playing. I'm like, how can I learn this better? And so I think that's what got me into mathematics and probability. And I was like, oh.
Competitive nature, kind of?
Totally competitive. Yeah, totally competitive nature. We can bring up pickleball now too.
Well, I do want to make the switch because obviously you're very experienced and good at what you did as a university professor. And I know that just before I even knew you through Bricks where we met, I knew that you had, gotten rewards there at Boise State and whatnot. But I want to switch from Jonathon the professor to Jonathon the entrepreneur.
Okay.
Because I think that, and just talking to you again, I know that you've struggled with certain things on the entrepreneurial front.
Yeah.
So over the course of, because how long has DMTI been a thing?
So we started in 2008, but just as a little S Corp on the side to do some consulting work. So like if I had some summertime or really my Sam and some others are like, oh, we want to do this work. I'm like, okay, you go out, and then I'll start bringing in the money. That's kind of how we started, just doing professional development work with teachers out in school districts.
And again, is your name behind the business, or did you collectively go in on the business?
Oh, so great question. So John Ballou, love him. He was one of my professors in my undergrad, and he ended up starting a business on himself. And I remember one day he drove this little Datsun pickup, and then he's like, comes up in this Corvette to pick me up to go to coffee. I'm like, what the heck?
What are you doing?
And he goes, business just made $2 million this year. I'm not going to be a professor anymore. And then he just ran this business, which started doing $2 million, $3 million, $4 million, $5 million. And so about that time I was heading off to go to graduate school, and he's like, you got to do this. So I always had that in the back. And so then I actually started doing a little bit of this professional development consulting with schools. And then we started building the primary math assessment. We built an assessment to really test kids out. And so he helped me fund it, get a programmer. And so that was kind of the big push. And then he died of cancer within 3 years. And I was like, okay, now I'm on my own. What do I do? And then some of the guys who were working with me, like Sam was the first one. He goes, I want to do 100%. I just want to do this for you. I want to go out and just work in schools. I'm like, okay, how do I start figuring this out? So then that started, meeting with lawyers and getting all the ducks in a row. And so at the university, what I was explained to is like, if you have this idea and you do it and you fund it yourself outside the university, you own 100% of it. If you do it but use university funds, we own 30% of it. If we tell you to do it and you build it, we own 100% of it. So I was mentored and said, okay, you do this, you do it, everything outside. And so I kept everything separate But then, yeah, by a few years ago, I was having a number, Keith and Jackie and Jana, a bunch of people to going, we are going to all kind of move in that direction. We want to do business stuff and separate from the university. And then my wife said, you can't do both. And so I felt at that time, after about 20 years, I was getting the highest awards from research, my service, and my teaching. I got Professor of the Year for teaching in 2019. And I was kind of at a point where I'm like, I was more excited about the business stuff and working with teachers. And my wife's like, I think you should make the jump. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But then you don't have the medical, you don't have, this steady salary. You don't have, it's like, that's pretty scary. And it's like, okay, let's do it. Let's try it. And looking back, I'm like, this is great. I mean, still my anxiety goes up and down because I don't have an income, a steady income, because I work with schools. So it's like, oh, you get some money in May, you get some in August, and then you have to make do all the rest of the year. It's like,
do you have established contracts with those schools, or how does that work?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So typically we kind of go in. This is not the best business model, because we're like, we'll go in, work with you for basically 3 to 5 years. We're going to help you solve all these problems, get your teachers up to the standard, have this curriculum, and then we're going to move out. So that's what we've been doing. So we've had a lot of really good contracts that last about 3 to 7 years, and then we moved to new schools. I've done no marketing; it's all word of mouth, and we just continually grow. But the last 2 years, we've built the entire curriculum. We've built a primary math assessment, an intermediate math assessment. We have target activities, a fluency. We have a book that just came out. We've got 3 more that are about to come out. So we have 4 apps that we just built. We have 2 more. So like we have all these things just in the last. So like leaving the university, now all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I can just build all these things. But it's keeping all those contracts, getting all that work done. Most of my pay, everything I bring in, pretty much just goes to all my staff and my programmers, and I just give back to build the business. But we're probably about 6 months away from like just really unleashing lots of stuff. So I'm pretty excited about it.
With how much are you earning, and then how much are you reinvesting? So if you said you're not really making a salary for yourself, how much are you investing in employees? How much are you reinvesting in the business itself?
You could just go in like percentages too. You
don't
have to,
yeah. So the business right now, like just increasing, probably about 6-fold over the last 3 years, which is pretty cool. So the business is getting close to about 2 million. So about 1.9 million last year, where the majority of it goes to my staff. They go out and do all the work in school. So that's probably about 60%, where about 20% is the computer programmers. That's where most of my investment goes. And then, of course, all the taxes and accounting fees, the legal fees are unbelievable. And we're working in 8 states. So it's like, people don't always realize those things too. It's like just the amount of work I have to do from accounting and legal fees in each state, and all the, like California is probably the toughest by far.
Because you have different taxes for different states, and you have to collectively take account for that.
Yep. So that's
brutal.
And that's been a huge learning curve for me, because I'm like, oh, okay. So we added these 3 states. Oh, okay. Now, and so all these increases in costs. So I really try to stay at a minimum amount, bringing in for myself, because my staff's amazing. So I want to keep them on. They do incredible stuff. And then my programmers. And so it's all kind of about this. For me, it's a 1, 2, 5, 10-year vision. So here's my 10-year vision, which my wife's, she thinks she's 8 years from retirement. So I guess my 10 years really 8 now.
What do you see that business grossing in that 10 years? Like what is that goal?
Yeah. So going from right now, it's more, all of it is service. And so with service funding, it's great. You have the money, you can pay for it. But like if I was to sell the company, you would sell the company for exactly what you made. So it's all about passive income. So how can you start making passive income? So now it's, how do we grow the apps, the books? We're building classes for teachers to take that online. We have a full set now, 8 modules from kindergarten through 8th grade, target activity, just all these different things now. So now we can start bringing in parents and schools where we don't have to actually be there. Yeah. And so that's what I want to increase by at least 5 to 10 times within the next 3-4 years.
Are you seeking help for that? Or are you, again, doing your own thing and kind of?
Great question. Yeah. So one thing my wife did say is, do not put us in debt.
Yeah.
And so I do everything, whatever I can bring in. That's why I put everything back right now. We are starting to look at now. We've had some people talk to us about investors and things like that. So we probably are at that stage now where we're going to start to grow.
Get some partners potentially.
Yeah.
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 How much do you delegate business side of things? Because you talked about how you're building all these things, and obviously that's your repertoire right there because you have all the mathematical experience.
Yeah.
But like, what do you struggle with on the business front, and how much do you delegate of the struggles?
Yeah. That's a great question too, where like I have to do everything, from every small thing. Like if something goes down, there's something going wrong. It's like I have to do everything from anything you think is silly. So I love, business people are like, oh, you own your business. It's great. It's like, yeah, you kind of, if you see it, this part looks great, but all of this time and all the headaches, absolutely not super great.
Can you give us an example though? Because like, for example, taxes, like an accountant would educate you on, hey, like here's how the taxes are looking. This is how it would go. Or a lawyer would do the same for law. But when it comes to like business dynamics, some of those hard choices that you have to make.
Do you have an advisor?
Yeah, no. So one of my programmers, he works with a number of different groups across the country. So I've gone to a couple 2-day meetings in Los Angeles where they're like, okay, this is how you grow. This is how you grow businesses. Education really is different because it's not like we're selling a product and you're getting that funding in. It's a lot of red tape that you have to go through, which makes it really difficult. Matt, what was your first question though? I'm gonna come back.
Oh, just what do you delegate, and how do you delegate it over the the growth of your company?
Yep. So I end up dealing with all the business stuff, all the accounting, the legal stuff, which is kind of crazy.
But why?
Yep. Part of because I think first of all, I want to learn all of it myself. Just like with the math, the education, I want to know every loophole, every problem, and feel it, and then go, oh, now I can delegate it. So even like then writing the curriculum, doing the assessments, like, okay, now I have this person. Okay, Sam, you're doing that part. Okay, Jackie, you're doing this. Keith, and so now I have them where I can delegate. They're doing incredible stuff, helping me with the books, the presentations, the writing, reacting to all the stuff that we're doing, that we're building, which is great. So there is delegation of that. Not so much like on the business pieces yet.
What do you think that is? Like, obviously you're a great learner and you're like, it's super commendable and actually incredibly impressive that you can take on all of these things and figure out a way to make them function highly. But wouldn't it be more efficient to try to seek somebody out that's a professional in that field and like work with them together? Even if it is like initially an investment, for the long term, though, it might have a better return.
Yes, Austin. Absolutely, I know.
Well, you done did it.
I think I know that's the next direction I need to go.
Okay.
I just haven't done that yet. So part of me is like, okay, I have to get to I guess in my mind, I'm thinking I have to get to a certain level where the business, I think if I had more cash flow coming in, I'd feel better about that. Because right now everything's invested back out. So I'm always at this kind of level, like here. So I'm like, I'll just do it then.
But you've kind of always proven yourself right though, too, and that you're always capable. Have you ever proven yourself that you weren't capable?
Oh, probably. I don't know. I failed many times.
But then did you circle back around and figure out a way to fix it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you think you would do that if you could go into debt for the company? Would that change things?
I don't know if it's because I'm 55 now. So it's like, I don't know if it's because of my age and because retirement is so close that I don't make those decisions.
Can we talk about those hard decisions, like with you and your wife, and like how business plays a role in your relationship? And like she puts a hard line, like, we're not going in debt for this.
Yep.
Then what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you guys come to an agreement or a compromise?
Yeah, that's been, so I mean, being a professor, and she's was a teacher, professor, then principal. And it's like, okay, so here's our goals and here's our retirement and here's our plan. And it's great. And so we have this year and 8 years now that we're going to retire. Okay, now 3 years, like now the business is, now I have nothing else. It's just the business. Like, oh, okay. So what do we do? So I think it's probably more age of thinking that we're like right there. Because still have that spirit, like you're saying, like I want to go and I don't worry about, I guess I don't want to be in debt. We don't want to be in debt. We have that conversation a lot,
Right.
but then how do we do it where we can still manage things and then move forward at the same time? But it has slowed. I probably could increase the business faster if I would have, if I would have done that.
And like with that goal, do you see yourself selling the business at that point? Is that the goal?
That so my goal so I have this vision over the next 8 years for sure, 2 to 5 years is I want to write a number of books, build these courses, build this business that I know is going to affect massive change in math education. And as soon as I build that within 5 years and then have the staff that can start taking that over, then it's like, yes, how do I sell it? Yes.
Okay.
And then probably still want to be part of something because I just really, the other thing is I just enjoy it. I just really like it. So
Yeah.
it doesn't like, I'm up at night reading, I get up early, you know, I have my routines during the day. I'm like, and I'm like, I don't know if I can retire and go, oh, I'm done with that.
Well, that was my initial thought because like I've seen you and I've seen how you operate. You are incredible. Like I've seen you like drink the night before, and
Spartan
then
race.
we'll wake up and he's the first guy up in the morning, like hoorah, ready to go, and like Spartan race is jumping at the front of the line and like ready to go. So
I know.
it's really like your energy impresses me. Is that something you've always had? Have you always just like had just like this like Energizer Bunny kind of vibe?
Yeah, I have. That's probably something that's helped me always. Yeah, I've always been like, I want to do a run. I want to do extra. Let's deviate. Let's go over here. Let's do whatever. Yeah, I want to do more always. I mean, like right now, like my daily routine. I think because that's really important for me. Just through being a researcher, a professor, and with the business, like I get up every day, and my routine is pretty much the same. I read for 30 to 45 minutes. I'll do some stretching, and then I try to do, if I can, 2 45-minute what I call sprints, where I shut off all media, and just write, work on a book, work on one project, and then now I can deal with emails. But then I'm like, nope, I have to work out every single day. So what's my workout routine? Am I playing? Before it was racquetball, now it's pickleball, some pickup basketball, mountain biking, Spartan races, lifting weights. So how do I balance those things? Because that's a critical point. And then how do I mix in family things? So all those things become really important. But my family knows too, if I don't read, if I don't do some work and I don't do a workout somewhere in that day, then everything else kind of fails.
How did you formulate those routines and habits to become the staples, and what value do they bring to you?
I think
specifically, like for each one.
Yeah. So I think, so the first one was working out. I think even from high school, college, it was like just the importance of being active all the time. I felt great. So if I was like bummed about like anything, you're doing some school work, you had a bad test, your girlfriend breaks up, like, I don't know, all these different things that happen, I'd go and work out. I'd play basketball, go play Frisbee with friends, and being with people.
Right.
I want to be with mostly the sports, not just like going for a run by yourself. It's like, okay, it does help, but rather be with people. So that was my first one. It's like, okay, so that routine's always going to be there, because any day that I didn't get a workout in, I was like, wow, I am awful. I can't think well. I'm crabby. I'm awful to people, to myself, whatever.
So it had a performance benefit.
Totally. Yep. So that's always why it's like number one. That's why like drawing myself to you guys, like, yep, this is awesome. It creates my energy. And then as I was doing in graduate school, then I was like, oh my gosh, I started reading. I had to read to get through grad school. I was probably reading 5-6 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was never a reader growing up. I was like, what the heck? I just like solving problems, doing math, doing science, things like that. But then I started reading so much, I'm like, oh wow, this actually is pretty awesome. And so right when I got done with graduate school, I wanted to keep reading. So then I decided I'll do three reads. So I do something. I read one book that's either about exercise or health, eating, something mental, whatever, to then a cognition book on science, then a math book. And so I do a rotation of 3 books. So I'm always doing that, which just kind of energizes me for thinking about history, historically what's happened or what's happening with the world around us, to then being physically fit or mentally. So hopefully that answers you.
What's something that you currently, like a struggle that you're currently working on, or a weakness,
I like it.
whether it's entrepreneurial or personal, or a
Ah,
combination?
yeah.
That's a good question.
So I think the balancing family, work, and working out that's always kind of a struggle. So I'm always trying to figure out, because like trying to do a Spartan race, like, okay, so how much do I train? I want to do this race, which means then my training has to increase. Okay, so that becomes a struggle, or then that starts taking away from family time. So trying to manage those things, so that's always one. Work wise, it is. Yeah, I have, probably goes back to what you were saying, Austin, is I know I should delegate more of these things. So I'm doing too much when I know I want to be, I've got these 4 books in a row that I want to write. I got 2 courses I want to build. And I've got 6th, 7th, and 8th grade that I'm still working on these modules, these curriculum that I want to revise and redo. And so then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I got 4 platters right now and 3 plates or 4 plates on each platter spinning. Oh my God. Okay, so now I got to really think about, like, this is the platter with this plate, and how do I navigate that? So what's going to fall or hit hard? Okay, this is an emergency now. So now I have to deal with this, which then puts this back. So I think that's my biggest frustration at any moment. Where
Would you say then, because this is why I'm curious, is because I'm also a very routine person, even if my routines aren't necessarily routines, they're just like habits I've developed.
mm-hmm.
Would you say then that in a way your routine is a weakness because your routine is tied to all these different things? Like I like Austin was saying, you were so energetic. I've seen you and played pickleball with you, and you had already worked out. You had played a pickleball game, like a pickup game of basketball, and probably went for like an hour or 2 hike. So I don't even know how that fit in the day. But do you think that is a problem? Because if you don't get to those things, you said you struggle throughout the day.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is there shame attached to that too?
Totally.
Yeah.
So I have my notebook, usually with me at all times, and I have my to-do list, and I have here's my work list, and here's my other things I want to get done during the day, which are my workouts and everything else. Yep. And if I might have 20 things, and if I have 2 things unchecked, I'm just like, yep. And then I'm up till midnight. And then I'm like,
threw away the day.
Yep. Day's awful.
I'm not gonna lie, I've done the same thing where I have like a
I
full
feel like I'm
notebook.
ignoring you over here. Sorry.
I have a notebook too where I write out those things, and if I don't finish those things, I'm like,
It's almost like a personal letdown.
It is.
It
Because
totally
it's
is.
like it's like a to-do list of like, okay, I got to do this, and if you don't hit it, it's like shit.
Yep. So one of the things I've also done is I have in my office, I have a whiteboard across from me, and I'll put, those are where I do like a weekly and a monthly. Here's my checklist. So then that helps me a little bit. So I'm like, oh, okay, I'm working on that. That is one of my monthly goals. I know it's going to take me 4 weeks. I didn't get my hour or 45 minutes on this one. So that helps me a little bit. I don't know if that.
Oh, that does.
Can we talk about your goal setting and how you prioritize specific things? And do you do like a weekly, monthly, year, 5-year goal?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always done that where I'm like, I usually do 1, 3, 5 for sure. It used to be 10, probably not as much anymore, but yeah, I want to do 1, 3, 5. So like in 5 years. So when I'm thinking about like the company, or I'm thinking about our household, our mortgage, cabin, kids, whatever. I've all my 5-year plans of what I'm seeking for that. And then I break it down to usually a 3-year, a 1-year. Here's my 1-year goals, and then a monthly, a weekly, and then daily goals every single time.
How do you establish those checklists, and like how do you rate performance?
So 100% you have to get them done.
Is that like for the most part? Are you 100% of the time getting things done?
Probably about 98%.
Wow.
Yeah. So I have every notebook for the last 20 years, and they're all on my one of my bookshelves. And every Christmas I review them, and I go through and go, okay, what did I not get done? Did I get through? And I usually write at the beginning, here's my 5 goals for this year. Yeah. And I always have a word for the year too. Like this year is I just pick one word for the year in January. It's like this year's build. Okay. Because I know this is the year where I think the business we're going to build it and do the passive income and then extend it.
Where did you learn that from?
Oh, so I have really good friends and family. I think we all read, we have great conversations. My sister said, stop doing, New Year's resolutions. They don't work. And I just saw this little book. I think it was 3 guys wrote it, and they go, we're going to stop doing it. We're going to do a word. So I think about 7 years ago, I tried to make my whole family, my wife and I do it in all of our friend groups. There's 8 of us. We all, okay, it's January 1st. Not everybody likes it. One of our friends for sure. He's like, I don't like this at all. He's retired, so he doesn't want to do a word.
He's like, retired. That's my word.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we're like, pick a different word. So I pick a word each year. And like 1 year I picked active, probably like 5 years ago. And everybody's laughing at me. They're like, what? That's stupid. You can't use the word active. You're super active. I'm like, I'm not. Because I would find myself,
Relative.
I was going to say relative.
It's relative. Well, I might say like the kids were still at the house or something. I'm like, hey, you're in the fridge. Would you grab me this and bring it over to me? And that year I'm like, get off the couch.
Active. Yeah.
Yeah. And it changed. And now my wife was like, oh, your coffee's empty. You want me to go get you a cup? I go, nope, I got it. I just get up and get it. Cause I'm like, it just helps me just kind of motivate myself. So this year builds the word to kind of do that. But yeah, to go back to, I like to, the metrics are kind of hard. It was easier when I was a professor, super easy. It's like, yep, this is the grants, this is the teaching. Here's my scores, evaluation scores. Here's the number of articles I'm producing. So super easy there. Mm-hmm. It's been harder with the business because I'm like, that probably goes back to another struggle because I'm like, okay, I put a lot of money the year before into programming. I hired a new team to kind of help with everything. And this is what we're going to have, all these products, all these things ready to go last June and July. Last June and July come, they're not ready to go. I was in full panic, but I couldn't control that one because the programmers had to do it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that was probably like one of my biggest struggles. So then I recreated, working with my team that I have. Jason's, his company's just absolutely amazing. And all of a sudden they just came to, like, we meet twice a week where we have our little mini goals, and they've produced what I've wanted, but I'm a year late on it. But super excited. What they've done is incredible. But yeah, some of those metrics are a little bit harder for me to measure right now because I'm probably doing too much, and I need to start delegating, do these things, and recreate those.
Have you ever thought about developing principles and habits for professors just to be more efficient instead of outside of just teaching them how to educate specific topics? Have you thought about creating methodology for professors to be better professors and more highly functional? Yeah,
I'm kind of laughing at that one because that's like squirrels. I think. I've thought about it. Professors are really interesting people. They're very myopic in what they do. And they tend to do things very well at a very deep level, singular.
They can't broaden the horizons.
No, they don't. And every time they try, and that part really frustrates me because a lot of them go, oh, and so we think you've done one thing, you've done it so well, and I respect you on that deep level. Now we're going to say, and all schools, all of the United States should do this. I'm like, no. You have not, you don't go in the trenches. You're still in the ivory tower. So I learn from professors, they're super amazing in very narrow ways. Now, how do you take that and actually go apply it? And I think that's probably what's also made me successful is I always spent all my time, as much time I could away from the university in schools. So if I could do anything, I'd go just sit in a school and write my papers and be around kids and teachers. And they stay at home. They are in their office at work. And I'm like, you don't absorb everything that way.
And kind of to now wrap things up, we appreciate you being on this podcast. What are some pieces of advice that you would give to new entrepreneurs that are starting out in a business? Because now you're talking about your success and what you wish you learned, but what would you tell these new entrepreneurs? I
think having that 5-year, 3-year, 1-year goal, having those in place. Also, I was told no by a lot of people. When people are like, you can't do that. It's not going to work, whatever. And go, you know what? I'll find that way. So know there's going to be failure, but go, I'm going to pick myself back up. I'm going to try it a different way. And always be willing to do all the grunt work for the glory as well. Because you have to see it all. And just have a curious and energetic time with it. Like just love it. And otherwise it's just going to crush you. Cause it is like some days I will work 12-hour days, and then it's just like, it's always absorbing.
But also, I wanted to add on to that as well, just to provide a definition of what success means to you personally.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So that goes back to what you had asked me earlier. I think success for me is building the business where I know that I'm affecting teachers and kids to understand mathematics better. That is my one success rate. And then it's, then do I have an income? Great. Everything else below that. But for me, success is all about, getting the business to where I want it, so kids and teachers and parents are more successful teaching and learning mathematics.
How does that coincide with your life and your personal life?
So I guess that's, I just want to work all the time. And so that gives me super amount of joy. Yeah. And then it'll probably, I don't know, with retirement stuff translate to like playing sports too. Like just picked up pickleball, and I put all this energy into that as well. I want to be successful there, but there's something about doing the math work that it just makes me very happy to see people. So if I can continue to have an income and give back so that people are like, yeah, we're going to be better in mathematics. Yes. Okay.
Love it. Awesome.
Cool, man. Thanks for coming on.
That was great.
Thanks,
was awesome.
guys.
Oh,
You guys are
thank
great.
you.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Moderately Successful Podcast. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts. I believe we're on iHeartRadio as well, Spotify, and then check us out on Instagram at moderately_successful.